Welcome, I'm Catherine Hadro, and this is EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Supreme Court petition. The Trump administration asks the High Court to reinstate abortion pill restrictions. We have complete analysis. Pro-abortion politicians and Holy Communion. A canon lawyer responds to increasing questions surrounding Joe Biden's Catholic faith and his pro-abortion agenda. An unplanned love story. From portraying a pro-life power couple on the big screen to becoming a real-life couple. Two unplanned actors exclusively tell us their engagement story. The Trump administration asked the Supreme Court last week to reinstate abortion pill restrictions. The request was for the High Court to put back into place an FDA rule requiring patients take the abortion pills in the presence of a physician. A U.S. district judge in Maryland suspended the rule in July following a lawsuit from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals declined to halt the judge's order while the administration appeals, prompting the administration's stay requests to the High Court. Abortion pills, also known as a medical or chemical abortion, provide a non-surgical abortion when a woman takes two pills containing mifepristone and misoprostol to end the life of her baby. Joining us now via Skype is Dr. Robert George, a professor of jurisprudence at Princeton University. He is a leading Catholic mind and top legal scholar. Professor, thank you for being here. First, what is your reaction to the Trump administration making this petition to reinstate abortion pill restrictions?
Well, it's necessary, of course, to do it because the decisions in the lower courts have been adverse. I expect the court to rule on it fairly promptly. It's hard to predict exactly how the court will rule. The record of the current court is mixed on these sorts of issues. Of course, this doesn't really get us to the $64,000 question, the real question that needs to eventually get before the court, and that is whether to reverse the decision in Roe versus Wade that constitutionalized the question of abortion in the first place and imposed on the entire nation, of course, the regime of legal abortion. So this is a skirmish in that larger struggle. We'll see where it goes.
Is it a successful strategy to try to advance the pro-life cause through the courts? What are the strengths and weaknesses of that?
Well, you have to work in the courts. There's no question about it. You need to protect unborn babies to the extent that you can, and you need to protect women from dangerous procedures. All of that is very important. There is also just the brute fact that the serious regulation of abortion to protect the life of the child is impeded by the Supreme Court's entirely unwarranted and unjustified rulings, beginning in Roe versus Wade, and then reaffirmed in Planned Parenthood against Casey, and again in more recent cases. Until those cases are removed, until the Supreme Court reverses itself, as it should, and surely someday will, on the issue, it very significantly limits the authority of states or the federal government and Congress to protect the unborn child legally.
As of recording time, President Trump has not yet released his updated list of Supreme Court nominees. How significant is this list and the role it plays in the 2020 election, particularly for Catholic voters?
It's extremely significant. It was a brilliant move, as it turned out, politically brilliant move by Donald Trump and his campaign in 2016 to commit himself to making Supreme Court appointments from a specified list. That gave tremendous reassurance to socially conservative voters, to constitutionalists, and especially to pro-life people who want to see the regime, the unjust regime of Roe versus Wade, finally end. And then, of course, he made good on his promise to appoint from the list. It worked very well for him last time. He's remained faithful to it. I expect that it will do him a lot of good this time as well, politically. I expect the names on the list to be a very impressive list of names. Probably most of the names on the list will be people that the president himself appointed to the lower courts, especially to the U.S. Courts of Appeals. You'll see the name Amy Coney Barrett on there, surely. You'll see Amoltha Parr. You'll see Joan Larson, Allison Ide, Stephanos Bibas, Gregory Katsas, all outstanding jurists. Again, all of the ones I mentioned were appointed by the president himself, which I think makes it even more likely that he'll choose one of them. So it'll be an impressive list, and I think it can only help him politically.
Professor, as a leading Catholic scholar, what is your response to Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden, a Catholic himself, promising to codify Roe v. Wade if elected president?
It's disgraceful. There's no other word for it. It's shameful. Maybe that's the other word for it. But how can anybody who, as a Catholic, is committed to the proposition that every single member of the human family, irrespective certainly of race and sex and ethnicity, but also and equally irrespective of age, size, stage of development, or condition of dependency, is the bearer of a profound and inherent and equal dignity, a creature made in the very image and likeness of God? How can someone who professes as a Catholic to believe that expose an entire class of human beings to death, to the legally permissible killing by abortion to the tune of hundreds of thousands a year? This is a grotesque mockery of morality and certainly of the Catholic understanding of the moral faith.
President Trump has previously promised to only nominate pro-life judges to the Supreme Court. Can you speak to this concept of what is a pro-life judge?
Any president should appoint to the court true constitutionalists. I don't think presidents should be making commitments to particular issues. The commitment should be to appoint people who will faithfully interpret the Constitution as it is written and not use his or her authority as a pretext under the Constitution for imposing his or her own particular political or religious or moral beliefs. The reality, though, is that a true constitutionalist, anybody who could remotely be described as a constitutionalist, would do away with Roe against Wade because it's utterly unwarranted. It's utterly unjustified. In fact, it is an anti-constitutional ruling. So I think that what the president must mean, what I certainly hope he means in saying he will appoint pro-life judges, is that he will appoint true constitutionalists who interpret the Constitution as written, and that will certainly mean getting rid of many unconstitutional, anti-constitutional decisions, beginning with Roe versus Wade and its successor cases that have imposed the abortion license on the nation.
Dr. Robert George of Princeton University, thank you for your great insight and your time.
Thank you, Catherine. My pleasure.
We continue our conversation about the Trump administration's petition to the Supreme Court with our pro-life panel via Skype. Mallory Quigley is the Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony List, and Dr. Christina Francis is a board-certified OB/GYN and Chairman of the Board for American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Mallory, welcome back. What's your reaction to news the Trump administration is petitioning the Supreme Court to reinstate abortion pill restrictions?
Yes, well, I think this is a part of the president's commitment to defending life, to defending women. These are existing FDA regulations are certainly not need to be strengthened, but we've got to maintain what we have in place already.
Dr. Francis, can you explain how the abortion pill works exactly?
Absolutely. So the abortion pill regimen is actually two different medications that a woman takes for an abortion within the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. So the first medication, mifepristone, actually starves that developing baby to death by blocking the actions of progesterone. And then 24 to 48 hours later, the woman would take a second medication, misoprostol, that will make her uterus contract, and she will then expel the dead baby.
Mallory, what have we seen from the abortion lobby throughout 2020 and the coronavirus pandemic when it comes to the abortion pill?
Yes, well, we see that our opponents never like to let a crisis go to waste, as they say, but they have been using the global pandemic to push increased access to abortion, and especially the abortion pill, saying that this is a way to get women the quote-unquote help that they need. Although we know abortion wounds women and takes the life of their unborn child, we've also seen them using up precious PPE resources by continuing to stay open and do elective abortions while doctors and nurses on the front lines of this pandemic have been in need of that type of equipment. So it really gets to the heart of Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry truly being a business, a profit-driven, abortion-centered business.
Dr. Francis, this week we also saw Texas Senator Ted Cruz lead a group of 20 senators urging the FDA to classify the abortion pill Mifeprex as a, quote, imminent hazard to the public health. Dr. Francis, from a medical perspective, what are the dangers of the abortion pill and the importance of maintaining restrictions?
Yeah, well, these restrictions are very important. APLOG always advocates for women to have the most excellent healthcare services available to them. And medication abortions are not that. They do not treat a disease. They have no health benefits to women, and they actually carry really significant risks. We know that the risks involved with medication abortions are actually 4 times higher than risks with surgical abortion. And the main risks that women face are hemorrhage and infection. And this can lead to the need for blood transfusions. It can lead to the need for emergent surgery. About 8% of women will need emergency surgery. And one of the biggest reasons that these restrictions are important is that they require the woman to be seen and evaluated by a physician prior to taking the medications. And this is really important so that we know exactly how far along in the pregnancy she is. The farther along she is in the pregnancy, the higher the risk of complications. It's also very important that an ectopic pregnancy or pregnancy outside of the uterus is ruled out. The real danger with that is that the symptoms of a ruptured ectopic pregnancy are pretty much exactly the same as the symptoms a woman experiences with a medication abortion, which are pain and bleeding. And if that ectopic pregnancy goes undiagnosed, that can kill the woman. And so it's really important that that's ruled out before she takes these medications. And if these restrictions are lifted, especially if they're lifted permanently, as the abortion industry would like for them to be, we are going to see women maimed, injured, and even dying, potentially in the thousands because of that.
Do you expect that abortion pill numbers have risen this year?
Oh, I'm sure that they have, because the access has been made easier, especially now with the lifting of the REMS, or the restrictions that govern their use. And we know over the last several years, in general, the number of medication abortions, point that now they constitute about 40% of abortions.
Thank you both for your insight. Of course, we'll continue to follow this story. Mallory, Quigley, and Dr. Christina Francis, thank you. As we reported last week, pro-life speakers were front and center at this year's Republican National Convention. From Abby Johnson's speech to Sister Dee Dee Burns' powerful address, this was the first time life was given such a prominent place at any political convention, either Republican or Democrat. President Trump himself even declared that all children, born and unborn, have a God-given right to life. We want to acknowledge and applaud this type of life-affirming agenda, and that brings us to this week's call to action. Thank President Trump for putting life front and center at the Republican National Convention. To send your thank you, just go to our website, ProLifeWeekly.com. If Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden and the DNC shared a bold pro-life message, we would be thanking him as well. Defending human life should be a top priority for us all, because as Sister Dee Dee Burns said in her address last week, I'm not just pro-life, I'm pro-eternal life. Send your message by going to ProLifeWeekly.com. As the U.S. presidential election draws near, many are questioning Joe Biden's Catholic faith over his pro-abortion stance.
The Biden-Harris ticket is the most radically pro-abortion campaign in history. They and other politicians are Catholics in name only.
That was former Notre Dame coach Lou Holtz addressing last week's Republican National Convention. The University of Notre Dame issued a statement clarifying it does not endorse Holtz's views or any candidate or political party. The university stated, quote, "We Catholics should remind ourselves that while we may judge the objective moral quality of another's actions, we must never question the sincerity of another's faith, which is due to the mysterious working of grace in that person's heart." Biden frequently references his Catholic faith in his presidential campaign, though he has grown more extreme in his pro-abortion views recently. In this run for the presidency, Biden now says he would repeal the Hyde Amendment and he would make Roe v. Wade permanent law. Ed Condon is the D.C. bureau chief for Catholic News Agency and a canon lawyer. who has written extensively on this topic. Ed, welcome back. First, is there such a thing as being a Catholic in name only?
Unfortunately not. It's not a title that I think you can really recognize as having any particular meaning. We're Catholics, we're Christians by virtue of our baptism, and that isn't a label, it's not a name. It's a change that happens at the most profound level of our being when we receive the sacrament of baptism. So you can be a bad Catholic, you can be a Catholic who's not in good or even any kind of communion with the church. You can be a very good Catholic, but you can't be a Catholic in name only. To have the name Catholic means you are what you are.
This week, the executive director of Catholics for Trump, Catherine O'Neill, tweeted, "I think if St. John Paul II were still alive, he would deny Joe Biden communion because of his support of late-term abortion." Ed, can you clarify canon law when it comes to pro-abortion politicians and receiving Holy Communion, particularly how it applies to Joe Biden?
Sure. Canon law doesn't single out politicians necessarily as a special or protected class when it comes to the discipline of the church. Now, Catholics who are in an objective and persistent state of grave moral sin are not to present themselves for communion, and if someone presents themselves in such a disposition, they're to be denied in some circumstances, and that circumstance being, when their pastors had a chance to admonish them. Now, in many places, the specific teaching and discipline has been developed around politicians. In this country, under the reign of St. John Paul II, a letter came from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, signed by then Cardinal Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict, addressing this point specifically and saying that persistent support for legal abortion was definitely sinful, to definitely meet this criteria, and that it was down to bishops and pastors to make sure that the politicians understood this, but that this, the having a public profile doesn't excuse you from the discipline of the church in this way.
In his most recent Sunday homily, Chicago Cardinal Blase Cupich seemed to indirectly address comments that Joe Biden is Catholic in name only. Take a listen.
There should never be a time and a moment in which we judge others in their faith journey, say that a person is not Christian enough or Catholic enough, or doesn't measure up to what we think they should. The Lord, too, calls them each and every day to take up their cross.
What did you make of what His Eminence had to say?
Well, Cardinal Cupich has a point. The Church's law doesn't judge internal dispositions in this matter. It's a question of something that's manifest externally. So if you are, for example, a politician who is actively seeking election on the promise of ever greater abortion access and ever later term abortion, that's an objective matter of fact. It's not to question any particular politician like Joe Biden's internal disposition, his sincerity in trying to seek Christ or to be a good Catholic. That's all, if you like, between him and his confessor and his God. But you can make judgments about the external actions and externally manifested beliefs of politicians, and indeed, as Catholics, we're required to take notice of these things and weigh them up.
Ed, how has our understanding, or lack thereof, I should say, of the Mass and of the Holy Eucharist impacted the national conversation on this topic?
Well, I think this is something that really gets lost a lot of the time, and it's a very important point, which is the Church doesn't primarily say that people who are in states of grave sin, or, for example, are trying very hard to entrench abortion rights, shouldn't receive communion as some kind of punishment just. In fact, we believe, the Church teaches, that if you receive the Eucharist in a state of grave sin, you're doing yourself very grave spiritual harm. So one of the reasons that the Church says in her teaching and discipline that Catholics in this kind of state shouldn't present themselves for communion is for their own good. So really, you hear a lot of times cardinals and bishops in the United States saying they don't want to turn communion into a political football. That's well and good, but at the same time, there is a responsibility to have a care for the soul of the individual politician. And if we really believe that the Eucharist is the body and blood of Jesus Christ, and if we really believe that receiving it in a state of grave sin causes grave spiritual harm, we have to ask, what's the kindness in offering it to people that we know it will do them harm?
Lastly, Ed, I imagine we're going to see a lot more of this conversation as the election nears. So on this topic of pro-abortion politicians and Holy Communion, what's your takeaway? What's the thing you want viewers to remember?
I think the really important thing to remember is that the Church has a hierarchy, and that the discipline of the Church, the law of the Church, the discipline of the sacraments is intrinsically linked to this hierarchy. So while we all want our bishops to speak clearly and forcefully on matters of life and also on matters of conscience, it's never a question of every Catholic needing to appoint themselves a sort of thought police over who is the most Catholic. That's why we have a hierarchy.
Ed Condon with Catholic News Agency, thank you so much. Coming up, it's an unplanned love story. Two actors went from portraying a pro-life couple in the movie Unplanned to getting engaged in real life. Stay tuned for our exclusive interview. Abortion is profoundly anti-women. 3/4 of its victims are women, half the babies, and all the mothers. This Saturday, September 5th, the Catholic Church celebrates St. Teresa of Calcutta's feast day. Mother Teresa frequently condemned abortion and worked to uphold the dignity of every life. St. Teresa, pray for us. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. A writer for Cosmopolitan defends her abortion in crass and heartbreaking detail. That is this week's Speak Out segment. If you watched last week's Republican National Convention, you may remember former Planned Parenthood Director Abby Johnson's address and this moment.
You see, for me, abortion is real. I know what it sounds like. I know what abortion smells like. Did you know abortion even had a smell?
2 days after that national speech, a writer for Cosmopolitan magazine responded by writing an opinion article titled, "Yes, my abortion did have a smell." The Cosmo piece says, quote, "My abortion did have a smell. It smelled like the perfume the kind, thoughtful, capable nurse was wearing as she held my hand during the 7-minute surgical abortion." The writer continues, "It smells like barbecued ribs and a glass of Maker's Mark a blind date ordered me as he watched the clock, patiently waiting for me to show up." The op-ed concludes, "It smells like choice, like a human right, like freedom." I share this article not to place blame on this woman, not to shame her, but to give an example of how removed from reality our world is when it comes to discussing abortion. Writing that abortion smells like perfume, barbecue, and bourbon distracts from the grim truth that abortion ends the life of an unborn baby in the womb. Depending on the age and size of the baby, abortion ends a life from a clamp that tears a baby apart, or from a suction catheter, or from abortion pills, or through induction. Abortion advocates use euphemisms and half-truths to describe the procedure because abortion, in its true nature, is indefensible. Let us pray our culture confronts its gravest sin head-on with clarity and truth. And let us continue to pray for all women who have undergone abortions. For this week's Pro-Life Focus, we introduce you to a love story that happened all thanks to a pro-life movie.
Abby Johnson is in the other room.
Here.
You may remember actors Jared Lotz and Elle Roberts, who portrayed 40 Dates for Life President Sean Carney and his wife Mara Lisa in the 2019 movie Unplanned, telling the story of how they helped Abby Johnson leave the abortion industry 1 decade ago.
Rough day at the office.
Life imitated art when the on-screen pro-life couple began a real-life romance around the time the Unplanned movie had its Hollywood red carpet rollout. And just last week, the duo announced they are engaged. The Unplanned actors share their proposal story exclusively with EWTN Pro-Life Weekly.
I was kind of praying about it, and I drove by an auto dealer that a friend of mine actually owns, and he had a Jeep for sale, and it's actually the exact year, color, everything that Emma
that I used to drive when I was younger.
I ended up buying this Jeep and parking it down at a lake that we would walk on.
Just like whenever we'd get frustrated or overwhelmed with life. He had parked it where we got to the end, and I was like, oh, that's a cute Jeep. We've been talking about this, and so we make jokes all the time being like, oh, you know, if you were going to propose, this would be a funny time. So I jokingly said, wouldn't it have been cool had you pulled out the keys and my ring would have been on it? And
She predicted the whole thing.
Then he pulled the keys out and my ring was on it.
The engaged couple say transitioning from on-screen to off-screen was natural and one a lot of people foresaw coming, even before they did.
When we first started acting on set, from the moment that we met and everything like that, the extras that would always be around us, because we were always, at the fence and we were with a lot of people, everyone thought we were married in real life. So that was funny, and we just kind of always laughed it off.
Their chemistry even seemed obvious to me when I interviewed the two at the Unplanned Oklahoma movie set back in 2018. Jared Lotz and Elle Roberts, so good to speak with you. So nice to speak with you. Yeah. What you said.
Yeah. What she said.
Acting like a married couple.
All the time. All the time.
That's what we get all the time. The Christian actors reflect on how first meeting and working together on the Unplanned movie set the tone for their future together.
I think that we experienced a lot on Unplanned that is something that a lot of people don't get to walk through, specifically with their significant others. I think that there was a lot of prayer and there was a lot of really, really incredible things that we were able to witness. And I think that it, more than anything, gives us a strong foundation in the aspect of we want to see change in the world moving forward. It sparked something in the aspect of us being a couple that wants to impact others in our relationship, in our careers, and everything.
Let us all pray for Emma and Jared as they prepare for marriage. Engaged couples need all the graces right now. Well, that does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Until next time, we'd love to hear from you. Find us on social media at EWTN Pro-Life on all social media platforms. And you can always send us a message by emailing ProLifeWeekly at EWTN.com. We love to hear from you. Remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.